Hello, everyone. I'm Nate Truex, and you're listening to the Croccast Podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Croccast Podcast. I'm your host, Nate, and today I'm joined by James Nifong. James, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be on the show here.
That was my pleasure. So, James, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, what your career is, what you've done with reptiles and all that?
Yeah, sure. So I am a uh, research ecologist, primarily studying American alligators as well as other sort of mainly coastal and aquatic organisms. But I use American alligators as a focal species to understand the ecology and interactions of top predators and how that applies to conservation as well as management in, like I said, mainly coastal ecosystems, but I do work in rivers and lakes and other aquatic ecosystems as well. Um, I started my sort of research with reptiles and amphibians in undergraduate, working for the Museum of Natural History at the University of Florida. And it sort of just blossomed into, research with alligators. And, you know, then I eventually got my PhD doing that. And had a couple of jobs in the field subsequent to the PhD. So yeah, that's kind of a summation of it.
Yeah. So, where is it that you do your research at?
Mainly in Georgia and Florida has been the main areas that I've studied. I've also gone down to South America, worked with black caiman, um, and before I was doing my dissertation research with alligators, I worked in Central America, in Honduras, Costa Rica, on broader reptile and amphibian studies, biodiversity, assessments and things. Um, but it's also, I've kind of broadly applied some of my research, um, and taken data sets from more than just uh, populations that I've studied. So we've combined data sets, from all over the U.S. In terms of alligators, and use that to better understand whatever questions we were trying to get at. So it's not only just where I've gone out in the field and caught them, but I'm very open to collaborations with other researchers. So, we combine data and just try to do the best we can with whatever materials we have. So, because a lot of times, a lot of these studies that we do are very limited in scope and funding. So, to answer broader questions, with bigger data sets. So you got to combine, research efforts, and that's I've been successful in doing that as well. So
Yeah. So, you want to talk about your research with black caimans since I haven't really talked about those on the show before?
um, it was a invitation I got from another collaborator of mine, Adam Rosenblatt. He was looking at dietary interactions, so we're stomach pumping black caiman, and as well attaching radio transmitters to do some tracking. I was lucky enough to get invited, and I had a lot of experience stomach pumping alligators, so he kind of wanted my insight and help to make sure the methods were being done correctly, things like that. I only got to go down for like a week, but it was amazing. I mean, the black caiman they're just beasts. Compared to catching alligators, it's a totally different world down in Guyana. And we went during the dry season, so you're kind of stuck in these rivers, as it's all dried down, and then during the flood season, so you can barely find them because it's such a expanse, the water is. And you go on these rickety little canoes, and that have steel plates on the front of them, and the locals have kind of figured out the best way to get these animals. So, uh, you know, they're really, really hardy, really tough animals compared to alligators. Alligators just like give up. Caiman, no. Black caiman, you'll be fighting them for 30 minutes just to get them on shore. So it's pretty interesting. But like I said, I think they published Adam Rosenblatt has published some of that research already. I wasn't the main investigator on it, so I'm not sure as to all of his findings. But I know he did some diet stuff and some radio telemetry that may still be ongoing, partly, or at least the analysis of the data and the findings are still, to come, basically. So, yeah.
Yeah. Uh, so this PhD project you're working on right now, your dissertation project, what are you looking at in American alligators?
So I got my PhD back in 2014.
Okay.
So that's finished. With American alligators, I mainly focused on better understanding the ecology and behavior associated with the use of marine habitats by American alligators. So for a long time, it was sort of anecdotally known that alligators use marine habitats, salty water, more than, 10, 15 parts per thousand salt water. We're talking actual full strength seawater, in a lot of these cases. And I was approached by my future PhD committee chair, and this is when I was an undergrad, and he'd known I'd been working on pythons in Florida and had sort of some drive to do research, and he said, hey, I do all this research out in salt marshes in Georgia, and I always see alligators out there, but there's nothing really in the research, literature about alligators using saltwater habitats. And we know they don't have salt glands. So, what are they doing? That was the kind of start of it. So I started on Sapelo Island, Georgia. It's a really cool barrier island off the coast of Georgia there. And I just started, going out there, catching animals, doing population counts, seeing what areas they were using. Then I added on looking at stomach contents, so seeing what they were eating, combine that with stable isotope analysis to get a better idea of how much of their diet was actually coming from saltwater ecosystems versus freshwater. And then we also tracked animals with GPS transmitters to see the frequency of the habitat use, see how far they went out into the marine habitat. Because what we found is they don't have salt glands, so it's really almost like a weekly thing. They'll go out to the salt water, they'll gorge themselves on blue crabs and small fish and other critters, and then they come back to these little freshwater refugia, basically small ponds and little wetlands in barrier island systems, and they do this constantly, just back and forth, back and forth, and so that was the main drive for the research and a lot of the descriptive stuff that I was doing. But then as well, in terms of the ecology, I wanted to know, there's all these other organisms out in the salt marsh that are really influential within the food web. One of those being the blue crab. It's actually a very important predator for other organisms that have big effects. So these snails and rib mussels and things that are very important in the food web there. So I took that into experimental setting and we actually had these big mesocosms where we set up to look at the interactions between alligators, blue crabs, and lower trophic levels in the salt marsh. And what we found is pretty cool that, well, first of all, alligators love to eat blue crabs. They love crunchy, salty, stuff. But then on top of that, they scare the shit out of blue crabs. So, I did these experiments to where, the alligators, they couldn't eat the blue crabs, but they were present. They had their mouth taped shut, these big, huge mesocosms. And then in the presence of alligators, the blue crabs would just stop eating. And, the other animals would survive at a higher rate, which has cascading effects in over long term and things. So this is one of the first studies like we actually experimentally showed that a crocodilian, this being the alligator, could influence the behavior of other animals, just through their presence. So that I thought that was pretty cool. It was pretty interesting. But
Yeah, for the uninitiated, so me, what is mesocosm?
That's just like in this case, they were 7-meter wide fish tanks, basically.
Okay,
They're big fiberglass pools. So mesocosm is just, a smaller version of, or simpler and smaller version of the habitat that they were in, right?
gotcha.
So, yeah, so we had these big 7-meter wide swimming pools, basically, and they had, marsh grass, they had snails, they had rib mussels, they had some refuge, and then they had blue crabs and alligators. And so we, not, made these things where it's a simplified kind of representation of the salt marsh. But it's something you could study, because out in the field you couldn't do that. Couldn't be putting big fences out in the salt marsh and keeping
Yeah,
alligators inside of it.
yeah, yeah,
Just wouldn't work very well. Um, but that's a problem you have with studying, big, predators that move around a lot, and they're hard to handle. And well, how do we understand what's going on out in nature other than, you know, simplifying it a little bit and bringing it in and experimentally testing some of this stuff. So,
yeah.
yeah.
You mentioned earlier you did looked at stable isotopes to see what percentage of coastal alligator population's diet is marine animals.
Yeah.
Uh, what what was that percentage?
Um, it varied. Um, some of so it varied by size and by sex and by habitat as well, or location, more location. Because I not only looked at it in Georgia, I looked at it in northern Florida, I looked at it in Cape Canaveral down in sort of mid Florida, and we looked at it as broader populations as well. Is that, as the alligators increase in size, the percentage of the diet that's coming from marine habitats as well. Now, and that went up to like, I think it's like 70-80% of their diet through, was inferred as being from marine habitats. Um, and there's always, on those estimates, right? Because it's not an exact science, but it's pretty good. So, the idea there being that, they get larger, they can stay out in the salt water for longer periods of time. They do venture further, usually, than, a juvenile, a smaller individual. And as well, they can take different types of prey, and they may specialize on some, marine prey, like a blue crab or baby sharks or things like that. Because we also identified, they ate, all kinds of stuff. But I was the first one to publish that they ate 4 species of sharks and rays. as well as sea turtles. Had them recording eating sea turtles. We had horseshoe crabs, shrimp, small fish, birds. Yeah, I mean, you name it, they were eating it, out from the salt water.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then there were also some variations, not significantly different stuff through by sex, and um, then the populations varied, just depended where you were at, you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So, what was the largest prey item you noticed these alligators taking, at least on a routine basis?
um, routine basis, I would say small mammals like raccoons, otter, raccoon, uh, yeah, they even like the sharks and things, they would take, they would be small. They wouldn't be like, they're not eating an 8 foot, freaking hammerhead or something.
You're not tackling a full-grown bull shark.
Right. They're eating the babies, that are, and nurse sharks and bonnet heads and smaller and rays and things like that. Um, and it's actually really surprising. Even these big alligators, like a 8, 10 foot alligator, we would find thousands of like small minnows and grass shrimp in their stomach. And I've seen the feeding behavior. It's really cool. They kind of act like a baleen whale, where they'll go into a big school of shrimp or fish and like snap their jaws, right?
Yeah.
And then pop their head up and push all the water out and then swallow whatever's left.
Huh.
So they're kind of, and they'll have thousands of little teeny grass shrimp. Literally sat there and counted thousands in one stomach. And it's like, how does this, 8, 10 foot alligator eating little teeny, little teeny shrimp? You think they're taking big, like a deer or like or something like that. But
Your
a
mind goes
lot
to
of
like those
times,
documentaries of Nile crocs in the Mara River or something like that.
yeah, but it's not sustainable. They'll get something like that every once in a while, and that'll keep them fed for a while. But on a daily basis, they're taking these smaller prey items, and that's been shown, across the board. But um, yeah, yeah, it's pretty interesting.
So, what was the largest thing you ever saw one of them take then?
Um, I mean, I did see we had a white-tailed deer. I didn't see it taken, but I had evidence of it as well. That's probably the biggest. I mean, other alligators. We had some cannibalism, of course. Um, yeah, that's. I mean, the sea turtle. That's my friend saw. He had evidence of them dragging sea turtles, on the beach. He's seen that before, and that's pretty interesting. I don't know, like up on Wausau Island in Georgia. So it's pretty cool. Um, yeah, but I'd say the biggest just animal in general, something like a white-tailed deer or a hog. Had some evidence of them eating hogs, which are abundant as well in those environments. So salt marshes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So that whole baleen feeding behavior
yeah.
reminds me a little bit of some, well, what speculated was behavior for some several extinct crocodilians. I think it's like
hmm
Marsuchus or something like that.
Yeah, there were a couple of like the pancake
Yeah,
mouth
really.
crocodilian. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a good feeding technique. I mean, because you get into these schools of, shrimp and small fish, and same thing with the silver side minnows. These little tiny, 1, 2 inch minnows, and they just occur in thousands and thousands. And you can't throw a rock without hitting one if you are in that environment. So, that's a lot of protein. You know, to miss out on if you're not using that technique, or trying to catch that food. And they're very opportunistic, just like every animal is, pretty much every predator. So they're not going to miss out on a highly nutritious food source.
Yeah.
They'll figure out, how to do
Yeah.
it. So,
Yeah. The calories there,
yeah,
you're going to try and get it.
yeah, no, definitely.
Uh, so with blue crabs, you said they love blue crabs. So like, how much of their diet would you say, depending on individuals, but like kind of average, how much of their
Yeah,
diet is blue crab?
um, I would have to look back at the data. I think it was something like, you know, occurrence wise, I think it was somewhere around like 40% of individuals or something like that. We're eating, blue crabs. I mean, you would find it all the time. It was not only blue crabs, there were also these little mud crabs and fiddler crabs and other crustaceans out there. They were eating shrimp too, so and then in the freshwater, they're eating crayfish, it's the same, very similar, animal. Their signatures show up different though, and that's what I was able to differentiate between, a lot of that stuff. Um, I would have to look back at the data for an exact number though. Yeah, I don't want to like
Gotcha. Yeah.
put my foot in my mouth. It's been a while since I've looked at that data set. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
what? Yeah.
So you mentioned in your undergrad you were doing some work with Burmese pythons. You want to talk about that
Yep.
a little?
Yeah, sure. And I actually subsequently for a position recently was working with them as well.
Okay.
Uh, I'll go back to, when we first started working with them. This was back in 2005, 2006. And this was really when they first started, you know, finding a lot of them, or a decent number of them. So I was a technician for the herpetology department at the Florida Museum of Natural History. And, as a sort of side project or as my main project that I was working on, every one of the pythons that would get captured or get mowed over or hit on the road down here in South Florida, they would send up to the museum, and we would do a body condition assessment. So we would dissect them. I would look at stomach contents, and that's when the first studies, were done on these guys as they were getting sent up. So I think the biggest one we had back then was like 17 feet. We published a couple papers on clutch size, as well as the evidence of them eating deer down in South Florida, um, and did some of the first diet studies that were done on them. I mean, since then there's been tons, right? Because
Yeah.
there's the python eradication programs. There's just other individuals. At the University of Florida and elsewhere, looking at diet and other aspects, genetics, a bunch of different kind of areas of study. But later, when I worked for the University of Florida again, here in South Florida, we were analyzing the data from the capture programs. So we were trying to see if there were better times to go searching for them, better techniques, better areas of catch per unit effort, sort of. Are we getting good at it? Are we getting better through time at finding these snakes? Um, you know, there were some questions we were trying to answer to better control the population. It's tough though. I mean, there's a lot of snakes out there in South Florida, a lot of pythons, and they're in areas that are highly inaccessible to humans. So trying to figure out ways to curb the population growth of pythons in Everglades and South Florida, it's tough. I mean, it's really tough. I don't know, what we're gonna do about it, because they are really messing up the populations of small mammals, of other organisms. So birds, wading birds. It's a mess. It really is. So yeah, there's been some. I did a little bit of work when I worked for the Army Corps of Engineers. I was working at their Engineer Research and Development Center, and they had a drone program. So we were trying to figure out some imaging techniques to be able to identify, where the snakes were at, using drones and satellite and stuff like that, on radar and other visualization techniques. Um, and yeah, I don't know where that research is at, but there was some promising stuff to where we could identify um, snakes based on some imaging patterns. So we'll see where that goes. And that could, help to at least identify them and locate them on a broader, scale, other than just driving on levees, because that's really all we can do right now. There's a levee network, throughout Everglades, and that's primarily where all the snakes are being collected. Is where somebody can drive,
Yeah.
but compared to the land area that is inaccessible, that's not going to cut it for controlling these snakes. Yeah, so, and it seems every year they're catching a bigger one with a bigger clutch,
Yeah.
more eggs. It's just every year it's just like that. So yeah, it's an unfortunate situation, but yeah.
What's I gonna say? So we're studying like body conditions of the ones you found. I keep on hearing had Burmese pythons and Everglades had like really high mercury and heavy metal contents. Is that just like general trophic buildups they see in a lot of ecosystems, or is it
Yeah.
in particular?
Well, they're particularly long-lived, right? And they eat a lot. And they're, bioaccumulating, mercury, other heavy metals as well, I would imagine. Haven't seen the full ecotoxicology report on pythons, the meat, but it's definitely not safe to eat, by any means, unless you want to take that risk. Um, and
Hey, I want to get superpowers.
right, or go crazy, one or the other, be like the Mad Hatter. So
Snake
sorry,
man.
my kitty is joining us for the talk. Say hi, hi. Um, but yeah, I mean, same thing with the iguanas in South Florida. They're trying to be able to market the meat, because there's a lot of iguana eradication programs. There's a lot of businesses down here that do that. There's a lot of homeowners and farmers, things like that, where they're paying a lot of money to take out these iguanas, but then there's no legal market for them, for the meat right now. So they're making them into chum. They're using the animals as best they can, but would be nice if, because there is a demand for iguana meat, down here in South Florida, because from their native lands, they're used as food very often. They're called chicken of the trees, so,
Yeah.
or chicken of the forest. So, um, yeah, it's just, with all the pesticides and herbicides that could potentially be in that meat, the FDA hasn't approved it for human consumption yet. So I think there were some studies currently going on with that too. But yeah, same thing with the pythons. I mean, it's pythons are worse though, because they're predators. They
Yeah.
bioaccumulate, and that's the thing. You get a big animal that eats a decent amount of food, uh, they're gonna have high mercury. Especially Everglades in general it's a very large area, and it gets a lot of natural mercury, deposition there, from the air. So, uh, that bioaccumulates very easily, in predators. So yeah, because even alligators and other larger predators have pretty high mercury from South Florida. Yeah, so it just depends on where you're at. Uh, yeah.
Yeah. So it's more like a South Florida thing, just because of
Yeah, I mean, even mercury is kind of crazy, because there's, environmental deposition, from the atmosphere, and then that bioaccumulates, and then there's also, legacy deposits and things like that, through agriculture and industry. So, um, yeah, it's something that the state tests for every year. I know, puts out advisory, it advises on where to eat it, how much to eat, from different animals. So, I would pay attention to you know the warnings, out there for
Yeah,
consuming any of this stuff. Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah. So, what was some other research you've done with alligators?
So the critter cam study was pretty cool. So this was part of my dissertation research as well. We partnered with National Geographic, critter cams, and I deployed these critter cams, which they're basically, cameras, but they have other sensors and other gadgets on them as well. But I designed a harness to mount those on the backs of alligators, to sort of get a point of view perspective of what alligators were doing out in marine habitats in this case. And we got some great footage. I think we ended up with like over 100 hours of footage, from I think it's like 15 or 16 alligators we deployed on, and we were able to. Uh, my primary focus was like, well, how often are they trying to eat stuff? How successful are they? What tactics they're using to attack prey in these environments, and we found some really cool evidence. I mean, it was interesting. I think it was like on average, they were trying to eat something like every, 3 hours or something like that. They're actually trying to attack something, and then they're successful like 50% of the time, which is really high for any predator. Um, they even had higher rates in there, like individuals did. The way we ran the statistics, I think that was the average, was like 50% of the time they were successful at catching whatever they attempted to eat. So, and you think of like, other animals that have that high of a success rate are things like pack animals, like wild dogs in Africa, you know, even lions and cheetahs. They have like 10 to 20% success rate
Yeah,
of when they try to attack something. So, um, just goes to show you that they're, the sit and wait, strategy they have for attacking prey. They're very good at what they do. They're very effective predators, and that's, one of the reasons, probably the main reason they've been around for so long.
yeah,
That lineage been around for millions of years. So, um, it's really interesting to me, trying to getting at, more of the secret behavior, because, animals behave a lot differently when you're out there shining lights at them, and in their face all the time, than when you get from their perspective with no humans around. It gives you a different, view into their the secret lives, these animals have. The critter cam program was great. They really helped out. It was basically like we rented the cameras from them, and they entrusted us to go deploy these, really expensive, developed units on alligators, and then return the cameras to them in one piece. So, that was always a little dicey, but it was fun. It was fun. There's, uh, haven't done much else. We did some further diet studies. I also looked at, uh, went from coastal environments into, spring systems in Florida. So these natural, spring-fed rivers, because they're, or 50s or 70s on, in those ecosystems. So I, studied food web ecology, and alligators being at the top of that food web in those systems. Um, but using stable isotopes and some contents were the same thing that I was doing with alligators, just applied it to a whole food web to better understand what's going on in those environments. So that research still mainly unpublished. I mean, we published reports and things like that, but yeah, it's still going a little bit, and I got to get back to that at some point. But um, yeah, I mean, I've done little side projects here and there and stuff, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's the bulk of it, though. Yeah,
Yeah. Uh,
yeah,
that whole obvious difference of behavior of an animal when you're not observing it versus when you're shining a flashlight in it is like it's kind of like Hollywood celebrities whenever there's camera
yeah.
flashes in front of them.
Right. They're camera shy, and a lot of times, I mean, in a lot of these
More like they
crocodilian
just show what a
populations,
real predator they are when the camera's not flashing on them.
yeah, yeah. I mean, some don't care, you'll see them out there doing their thing nonetheless, but
Yeah, George Clooney.
um, right. But even in some of these populations of like American crocodiles, for example, they've been doing these monitoring studies for so many years, running similar transects, going to the same areas. They get really shy, so we don't know if the numbers that we're seeing are truly representative of what's actually out there. Because as soon as they hear a certain boat or see a light, they go down and they don't come up. And if you're trying to do spot eye shine counts, it could potentially mess up the data a little bit. So so there's something to be said for like camera trap work and animal born imaging. It's a big field that's started. That's elucidated a lot of behaviors and activities that you would never see otherwise. Yeah, pretty interesting.
So, how did you mount the cameras to the animals?
So I just designed this. It was a single strap, and it kind of went behind the head, and it held the camera on the front. And it was a cradle basically. It had these two little bolts that came up. The little strap fit right down in between the two bolts, and then went under the chest and crossed in the front, and then behind the arms, and it all looped into one zip tie that was held on the bottom of the cradle unit. Um, and basically, so nothing was actually attached. It was like a book bag, like a
Yeah.
just like straps being held on. And at a predetermined time, there was a little, I mean, this was like James Bond stuff. So there was this little mechanism on the camera that would shoot. It's called an actuator, and it had a little black powder in it. You get an electrical signal from the camera unit and fire the black powder so it would explode and shoot a piston into a little blade that cut the zip tie. So it was literally like some James Bond, or like some spy stuff, or something that it would detach and then the whole unit floated. So that would just float up, and nothing would be left on the animal. There were also safety mechanisms built in, little links that eroded through time. So, and there were weak points too. It was only a little tiny 50-pound zip tie. So we had a couple that broke off a little early, things like that, but pretty successful with that method. And I've used that method again when we shot an episode for National Geographic, The Croc That Ate Jaws. It was last year it came out, and we deployed critter cams again on alligators out in salt marshes in Southwest Florida, and trying to record some interactions between sharks and alligators in that area. And we had success with those deployments as well. So it's a good method. It's fairly easy, fairly straightforward, cheap. You know, literally one cotton strap with a couple of, zip ties and stuff. So, um, but yeah, the guys at the St. Augustine Alligator Farm let me try out all these methods on some of their animals, to kind of perfect and develop the harness system. So that was nice, having that connection there. So, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, what are some studies you are looking forward or hoping to do sometime in the future?
So, um, I would like to expand on some of the um, ecological interaction studies that I've done, looking more on like landscape scale, things, what effect are alligators having, in different environments, and what happens if we could like exclude them from certain areas in time and actually measure these effects out in the environment. These are kind of like large scale studies. So I think they're very important, and it's just not been shown. There's a lot of inferred information out there. They're like, oh yeah, alligators are keystone species for this reason and that reason, but there's no studies to back up what's been said, or there's very few. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence. So that sort of thing, or doing some management to where we could in certain areas cull certain age classes, or just do some different things, kind of look at that, as well. I think there still could be more work done on just their use of marine habitats, and how they're doing that. Some physiological studies. There is some evidence that certain coastal populations of alligators can actually tell the difference between salt and freshwater, where freshwater, uh, you know, originating alligators couldn't tell the difference. So, is there some physiological changes happening too in these populations, where they can better deal uh, with the environmental conditions there? So it's kind of like a wide open, areas to study still. Uh, went for a job for Louisiana state biologist for alligators, so that just came open. Um, if I get that job, there'll be a lot of research being done. But there's some other focus areas that are important for industry, and things like that. Because there's a big alligator harvest industry there, farming and harvesting. I'm really wide open to any aspects of it. Really, I fell in love with alligators when I was like 15 years old, when I first went out on a hunt with them, and ever since then, I've just wanted to find out more and more and more. So, any aspect of understanding them more, and showing their importance both ecology wise, and just their existence, is what I'm interested in. So, it can be kind of wide open in that sense, though. Yeah, yeah,
But speaking of St. Augustine, are you going to Croc Fest this year?
yeah. I'll be there next week. Yeah.
Same here.
All right. Cool. Cool. So we'll see you there then.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I'm only 3 hours away. So, yeah, yeah. And try to make it up there. It's also the alumni meeting for the Croc School. I think it's like 20 years for Croc School has been going. So, I used to be an instructor, and I was an alumni, from Croc School. So, be good to see everybody there, and it's always a fun time. Getting a bunch of crocodilian folks together.
Yeah.
It's always a good time. So, yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So you mentioned you did research with, you know, spring-fed river populations versus maritime. So what are like some of the differences you notice between the two populations?
Um, well, the springs, they're really cool systems in general. There's constant temperature. It's like 72-degree water year round. I was studying in this first magnitude spring system, Silver River, or Silver Springs. It's actually where they filmed the creature from Black Lagoon. They filmed Tarzan there. It's a really iconic system in Central Florida. Um, there's not a ton of alligators there. I'd say like behavior wise, I mean, they're not doing much different. They're eating similar stuff, small fish, crustacean, crayfish, turtles, birds, occasionally. Um, the main thing that they're not doing is, making that cross ecosystem link. So they're just staying in the river. They do a lot of sunbathing to warm up because it's 72 degrees year round, so they got to be out of the water a little bit. Um, they weren't the primary focus of that study. They were just another predator in the system. But the way they were coming out, like in the food web, was sort of as very low on the trophic levels compared to, let's say, like a bass or a gar or these big predatory fish. Um, so you could see that they're mainly eating, again, smaller animals for the most part. Things like, the juveniles are eating, small arthropods, insects, and things like that, and then the larger ones were eating, crayfish and on up to, some turtles, things like that. But in the occasional bird, mammal, but yeah, it would, like I said, they weren't the primary focus of that study. So, but it was good because nobody had ever studied them in springs before. So it kind of gave some of the first research done on them in those areas. Um, yeah, but it's pretty cool when you're in that crystal clear water and you see these alligators doing their thing. It's pretty amazing. You can really see what they're up to. Yeah.
Yeah,
Gives for some really nice pictures and things.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, are there any other species of crocodilian you want to work on?
Oh, I mean, I would love to work on pretty much all of them. I have a lot of colleagues that work in Africa and Central America. Of course, I would love to work with some salties over in Australia or Indonesia, or in the Pacific area. Uh, there's also, I mean, because a lot of, again, crocodilians in general, there's not been a lot of large scale ecological studies done on them because they're hard to study from an ecological point of view. Um, and they're very hard, to understand how they fit into the different food webs. So I'd be interested in studying any of them, to tell you the truth. But I've worked with black caiman in the wild. I've worked with alligators, American crocodiles, a good bit. Um, so I would love to, get my hands on all of them if I could.
Yeah,
Definitely,
gotta catch
definitely.
them all.
But yeah, yeah, go catch them all. Um, but with intent at understanding some ecology of these organisms, because I think they're very um, misunderstood in a lot of places and overlooked as their importance. So and I think understanding more about how they interact in the environment is going to increase their conservation and benefit all around, to keep them here. That's the main thing. Yeah. So yeah.
Now, because you've done research with animals South Florida, specifically invasives,
Hmm.
what I want to talk about is one, haven't really, you don't hear about as much as Burmese pythons, obviously, but spectacled caiman. I keep hearing stories about spectacled caimans
Yeah.
have established populations down South Florida.
Yeah. They've been here since I think the 40s or 50s. Fairly well-established population. Um, you see them occasionally. I mean, there's certain areas in the Everglades where they're more well-established. I don't think they're problematic. There's not that many of them. They're very similar, ecology wise to alligators that are there. Um,
versus a
you know,
Burmese python, which is a snake nowhere
right.
close to anything else, any other snake that's ever been in Florida.
Yeah. And you just don't see the numbers, that you do of these Burmese pythons. Like, you'll see a couple small populations of caiman, and then, you know, there's collectors that come get them that know where they're at for the pet industry. There's, I just don't think that they're going to be an issue. There's not that many of them, you know, and there are, if FWC finds them or the park finds them or some others, they collect them and euthanize them. So I don't think they're going to take off in population and things like that. They'll probably persist. They'll be around, but you're probably not going to get every one of them out. But um, as far as being like invasive, I don't find that evidence like the negative ecological effects or economic effects that you associate with an invasive animal. There's a big difference, a big debate too, um, between labeling something as invasive um, and having the evidence to show that it actually is, has a negative effect ecologically or economically or human health wise versus just an exotic animal that's not native to the area that is doing pretty much absolutely nothing in terms of the ecology or things like that. Um, the other problem with the Burmese pythons and some of these exotics um, that could turn them into invasive is parasites and disease as well. So it's been shown there's certain parasites that the pythons brought into that environment and some diseases that could potentially spread because of them. Um, so it's not only what they're doing as an organism out there, but what they're carrying with them too. So yeah, but as far as the caiman go, they're I mean, there's also been, a couple Nile crocodiles caught in South Florida. There's been some dwarf caimans caught. A lot of these are not established populations, just, one-offs get released out there or get out of their enclosure somewhere.
Yeah.
And but the caimans, they came from when they were selling caiman out of the back of magazines, and comic books and stuff. You could order a caiman for like I forgot what it was. It's like under $1 or something like that,
The good
and
old
get one
days.
and get one shipped to you, out of the back of a magazine. So,
Yeah.
that's when those really came from, and they've just persisted. So I don't think they're an issue though.
Yeah. I mean, out
Ecologically.
of all the crocodilians, it makes sense that the speckled caiman is the one that's able to establish invasive populations.
They're hardy, man, and they're
They're
wily
rats.
too. Yeah, they're they're fun to catch. I mean, they're definitely a different beast than an alligator. They got a little attitude on them for sure. So I mean, they're very very athletic. As far as when you're capturing them, they can spin on a dime, and just you think you're going after the head and then or going after the tail and then the head's there.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're fun though. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, so, is there anything else you want to talk about?
Um no, no, I'm like I said, currently don't have a lot going as far as primary research or anything. I'm looking to get back into it, kind of in between some jobs. So, um, just staying active. I'm active within the crocodilian specialist group for the IUCN. So, we maintain some responsibilities through that, and I help out other researchers as they need it, with direction or help them out in the field. So, yeah, I'm excited to get back into it, more, head on here soon. But yeah, but I appreciate you having me on the podcast here, and yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Thanks for coming on.
All right. All right. Well, we'll see you at CrocFest next week then.
Hopefully.
All right. All right. All right. Well, sounds good, man.
All right, see you then.
All right.